I am very excited to now introduce Eleanor, who currently leads the AE org at Retool, which I'm sure so many folks on the company recognize Retool, have used Retool, have seen the billboards in SF. She's always been super passionate about building new go-to-market functions at early stage companies. So she's previously led operations, success, renewals, new business sales, really everything at Segment and Clever, and now Retool. So super excited to have you here today. Maybe we can start out with an introduction from your end, and then we can dive into some questions.
Yeah, well, that about summed it up. Hi from Mallorca, everyone. Where I'm on vacation this week, which has been amazing. I've been at Retool, joined in November 2020, where we were about 3 AEs and an SC and a few SDRs. And we're now about 240 people and 30 AEs. Just opened up London, which is really exciting, and many SEs and a whole SDR team. And it's been really exciting to be part of the growth. Before that, I was at Segment. I actually joined in operations and built out our customer success operations team, and then pivoted into building out an expansion sales team, a renewals team, and then a new business sales team. So I've done a lot of different go-to-market functions between Clever and Segment and Retool, and very excited about companies with product-led growth motions. I think it's very fun. The tension between a self-service and a sales company and a product and sales, to me, is really fun and healthy and creates a great culture and a successful business. And I'm very passionate about the early stage startups and building. And as you can probably see from my background, the team kind of becomes relevant. The building and the people side is what's really fun for me.
I love it. Awesome. So maybe we can start out with telling us a little bit more about what Retool's sales process looks like, because based on our conversations, it might not be the most typical sales process, especially the AE role, as you might see at other companies. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I always say that Retool's sales motion is, well, this is a very obvious statement coming from me, is the most analogous to Segment. But also I would say a Datadog would be very similar, and Mondo to some extent in terms of the developer audience. And with Mondo, you had open source, Datadog had a self-service motion, same with Segment. But for the sales teams, the AEs focus on 4 really primary channels: inbound, direct to the sales team; outbound, whether from the AEs or our BDRs; conversions from self-service; and then expansions of existing customers. And so each of these look really, really different. Typically, everything also looks really, really different anyone who's on here from Retool is going to laugh, but I've been trying to brand the macroeconomic climate, the MEC, so that we stop saying macroeconomic climate. But all of these things look very different in the MEC as well. And it's just been interesting to be in sales through COVID, through the sort of boom afterwards, and now in the MEC and how we've had to tailor our approach. But one of the most, I would say, emblematic examples of what Retool sales process can really look like is a few years ago, DoorDash came inbound. They had a problem they needed to solve. So Retool is a low-code platform for building internal tools, basically to build UIs on top of databases and APIs. But DoorDash came inbound and they had a problem to solve, which was they needed to have a way for their operations team to turn off deliveries in certain zip codes during storms, which makes a ton of sense because when you order food during a storm and then it's canceled, it's one of the more devastating things that can happen. And there was no way to do that. It was an ad hoc process. I think people would submit Jira tickets, and then an engineer would want to run a request against an API. And obviously it was very delayed, and urgency and timeliness matters in a problem like that. And so there are a few ways they could have solved it. They could have continued doing what they were doing, which is not scalable as they expand globally, to have people monitor storms and write into engineering back in SF and have someone awake to turn off delivery in certain zip codes during storms. So that was not a viable solution. They could buy a centralized SaaS product or a point solution that solves that. And there is not yet a startup that solves that specific problem. They could have built an internal app themselves using React. And so they could have built their own application, or they could use a low-code tool like Retool. So they came inbound, they signed a small contract to solve this one very important problem. And then since then, they've built now like 50 or 60 apps were used across many different teams. There's some in-depth account management where we're focused on finding new teams and new use cases and solving more problems. And now it's like there's batch tipping for couriers and shift management and things I don't understand because they're for engineering. And when they're thinking about rolling out new types of products, we have conversations with about the support tooling for new product lines they're considering. And so that's, I would say, the most representative example of what the Retool sales motion looks like today.
And thank you for explaining that. That was awesome. So this is all, where does the AE own versus other parts of the organization? And what is the AE responsible for in this PLG sales motion?
Yeah, so we have a self-service business, which is actually about 80% of our customers. And then the AE we'll get direct to the AEs either through outbound or through an inbound demo request that comes directly to an AE where they know they're going to need enterprise features. Like the most typical enterprise features are at most companies, SAML, sort of the wrappers you have around your product to be able to use them programmatically, higher security grade, integrating with GitHub, with things like that. So if they know they're going to need enterprise functionalities and they want to just go right to the source. Well, so AEs will run outbound where we'll reach out to VPs of engineering, directors of engineering, tools teams, data engineering teams that we know will benefit from Retool. AEs will own those end to end. And then AEs also work with and nurture self-service accounts. So they'll have a group of self-service accounts that they support where there's sort of two reasons for a self-service customer. Well, there's a few. To upgrade, primarily it's volume. So they've started using Retool with enough seats where they're interested in a volume discount for making an annual commitment and moving off of a month-to-month plan. Or they've started using Retool to the point where their company has gotten sophisticated. It's always right around 500 people when companies start needing SAML. It's usually when you buy Okta, I found. But so they've either reached a maturity point as a company or a maturity point in their use of Retool where they need more sophisticated tools as part of it to manage the platform. And so that's when they'll also reach out to an AE. So AEs will manage those conversations. About in 2021, 20% of the revenue that AEs booked came from self-service conversions, and we're tracking to higher than that this year. And so they will manage those conversations. So they'll do end-to-end evaluations of the platform, and then they'll work with folks who've been using the platform for a while, but maybe need to understand what the next level of sophistication or adoption looks like.
Amazing. So so AE owns new business from self-serve or someone who's already using the product. Once they commit to an enterprise track, do they then hand it over to someone else on the team?
No, because we're very land and expand. And so someone who has worked in a lot of different models like this, there's obviously no right answer for when do you do account management? When do you have a renewals team? When do you have CS do this? When do you have AEs do this? I optimize when I don't know what problem I'm trying to solve. I always optimize for simplicity. And also the stage your company's in is a huge factor in when and how to split out the org. So we try to keep it as simple as possible. So AEs keep the customers they close and are responsible for renewals and for expansions as well. And then we have a deployed engineering team, which is a very technical post-sales team, sort of like a post-sales sales engineer that works with customers on building their applications. And we also have a new CSM function that does more of the product management or project management. When we think about it as the CSMs work with them on defining the roadmap for the use cases they're going to build on Retool. The deployed engineers work with them on implementing those. And then the AEs are responsible for going out to new parts of the org, finding new ones, and working with the original buyer to make sure they understand the value that Retool is delivering to that company.
Super interesting I love that the AE team is responsible not just for new business, but we talked a lot about how NDR is actually a really important metric. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I very much believe it's the single most important metric for the long-term success of a SaaS business. I think top line revenue growth is obviously incredibly important, as is your ARR, your burn, all of these things. But the reason SaaS companies command the valuations they do is just typically margins are amazing and very high in some companies, not so in others. I've been on both sides of that. And because when you do it well, they're very sticky and your cost of sale is so low as more and more of your revenue each year comes from your existing business. And so the efficiencies that you get from having a low churn rate and a really high expansion rate the Medium article, I think the CEO of UiPath wrote when they went public about their NDR was insane. Snowflakes is insane. And those companies have just been able to grow so much and with such a relatively lean teams because of how high their NDR is. And so I always say I'd rather not lose a customer than win a new one. And you should never lose a customer. And so keeping AEs involved, people who knew the original buyer, why they bought, who have the relationships, who understand their business, who can be embedded in consultants, and especially with a product like Retool, where the acumen side is so important for AEs to be successful because you have to work with companies with vastly different business models. And the way you can know where to take discovery and where to take your conversations is knowing how they make money. What do they care about? What are the different roles? What do they do? What is their business? Where are they struggling? What are they focused on? And you can't just learn that overnight. You have to be really embedded in a company to be able to do that really effectively.
It's so interesting. I mean, that's kind of the main, to me, one of the key differences between a traditional sales motion and why product-led sales is so different. It's that AEs aren't just comped on you cold this person and got them in and you book the meeting and then you close this deal. It's no, we're genuinely trying to add value to you and finding new areas to continue to add value, new use cases. So it's very interesting. And I think you've done a great job at, probably because of your background, having both sides and like doing some of the other traditional post-sale work. It seems like you've did that mentality into the AEs on your team.
And I think Retool's more centricity is a huge part of the culture, our interview process, and caring about the customer is really, really important. And I also, again, open-ended platform, unlimited number of use cases. Like there's no one at a company just sitting there being like, well, sometimes we have some great champions. Like, what else can I use Retool for? Because there's no, yes, I use, Datadog for monitoring, and I use Segment to send customer data here and all this stuff. It's more like it's very helpful to have someone embedded who cares a lot about their business and understands it to find new problems for Retool to solve and help them understand how Retool can solve them.
So when the AE goes, actually, one more question, then I'll let other people ask questions on this topic. You might have answered this, but I'd love to go a little deeper. When is the handoff then from AE to, sounds like it goes from AE to a deployed engineer. And then do you even have CSMs?
We do. Yeah. So the AE always stays involved. So they do the renewals. So when they close a deal, they stay with the account. There's still a lot we're figuring out in our maturity, like how long it'll last, at least a year, maybe more. We're still figuring all that out. But they keep the account. A DE, a deployed engineer, comes in at closed one to help with implementation. And to get to our milestone for that team is activation, which is one app in production with at least 5 end users. And then we do have CSMs. We have a very small CSM team right now, and they're very new. And so the AEs have been doing a lot of that work, and now we're moving that. We're sort of carving out the CSM role to take part of what the deployed engineers have been doing and part of what the AEs have been doing, but they're focused on the project management of getting things to launch, finding future use cases, and working with our champions and our builders on making sure they're successful. What do they need to be successful? Whereas the deployed engineers are technical resources. We're very focused on how are you designing your apps? How are you building your apps? How are you optimizing your apps? How are you setting up the more sophisticated parts of functionality that you haven't set up as a self-service customer.
Got it. So your deployed engineers are customer facing.
Yeah, like they're in shared Slack channels. We do these things called office hours with customers, or we'll do build sessions where we'll do like paired programming sessions to build apps together. We'll do hackathons with customers. We'll frequently sponsor hackathons, which is really fun. We won one recently. It was the team that used Retool. It was very exciting. It wasn't just a Retool hackathon. We participated.
No big deal.
And the Discord and Pinterest, that was really fun. There's a video they made so those are the types of activities the post-sales team will do.
Amazing. I'm going to pause because I know I could keep going. For any questions from here, you can write it in the chat or just unmute and ask or raise your hand. All right. Wow.
Hey, Eleanor, Alex from your past segment life.
Hi, Alex.
Do you think of what's going on? Do you think of the deployed engineers any different than a solutions architect?
Not really. I mean, we haven't rolled out, I see it as a very similar functionality role. We haven't rolled out like internal professional services yet. We've started working with partners on professional services. And I could see those roles existing alongside each other, but in a technical product where your success lives or dies with the ability to get activated, to get implemented. There's work that has to happen in order to be successful with the product. You can't just use it off the shelf. I think it's really important to have a solutions architect, a deployed engineer like that to support customers. And I always feel every customer interaction, you have to be adding value. And sometimes the only value you can add is just making sure they're using the product. And our deployed engineers are experts at in Retool and using the product.
Amazing. The questions are coming in. So Erin asked, for that self-serve segment, do you have any kind of scaled CS touch? If so, what's the primary goal of that outreach? If not, is there any sort of engagement that does happen that is not sales oriented with self-serve? We've
done so many experiments around this so far. And we had a scaled team at Segment, actually, a scaled customer success team that worked with self-service customers. That was I actually thought was really successful. It was not even and low touch, fully tech touch. Like they had the happy path mapped out for customers, but it's really hard to not turn into full-blown support when you're doing that, because like your support team has worked so hard to set the boundaries of never turning on the phone. Then you have a team that wants to do it on the phone. And then it frequently turns into just a support team that isn't quite as good at support. So I think that's really challenging. We don't really have that at Retool. We've experimented with the concierge program, where we had a team that focused on making sure they could get set up with self-service. Our AEs and sales engineers actually, but it is sort of sales oriented. When they have a really great account that wants to get started with self-service, they'll make sure they did set up with self-service and then nurture them, because in 6 months or a year, that's going to be a huge customer. Like maybe it's a very strategic load, but they're not ready for enterprise because it's just a small team. They really want to pay by a credit card. There's not going to be enough spend. It's not worth it. But knows in a year or two, it absolutely will be. So they'll make sure they get set up, and a sales engineer will typically support them. But we haven't, definitely not at Retool, quite cracked the nut on a scaled CS or self-serve. And it's just such a funny thing to reconcile, because the whole point of self-serve is self-serve and you have support, but you know that the human assist does make a really big difference. And so we don't have anything today. It's at Segment, we did this too, where it's something we'd have to, every 6 months, we had a new experiment for it. And I'm confident we'll do the same thing here.
Thank you. Do you want to unmute and ask yours?
Yeah, sure. I can do that. I think I put it in the text, but I'm always a bit, when I see SaaS companies making a lot of specialized teams, I'm not sure I understand it. So I just want to ask, why did you decide to take something that seems to be working and then create 3 teams that might create misalignments, complexity, politics, all sorts of, and also give the customer kind of 3 people to talk to? I'm quite interested in knowing why you made that decision.
Well, to make it worse, we actually do have 4 teams, because we also have sales engineer, pre-sales. And so it's funny, because I actually always think of our model as less complex, because a lot of companies will also have an account management team that does expansions, or a renewals team that does renewals. And I always think about it as what's the lead and what's the right skill set you need at each part of the customer life cycle, and how can you hire for that, and how can you make sure the people you're hiring are set up to be successful. So I think of our life cycle as acquire, adopt, grow. Well, really acquire, adopt. It's really acquire, activate, adopt, and grow. And acquire, that's the AEs and the sales engineers, who are experts in discovery, who are experts in negotiation, who are experts in multi-threading and relationship building, and quite frankly, closing and asking for money, which is actually a fairly important skill set, and definitely is a skill. And then our sales engineers are really good storytellers. They're super technical. They're extremely customer oriented. They also actually are extremely strong at relationship building, at multi-threading and running POCs. And then activation, that's the deployed engineers. That is not an AE skill set. Like an AE can't go in and get them deployed on-prem and get them integrated with GitHub and get SAML configured. And the deployed engineers are experts at triaging and cycling through feedback. And then we layered in the CSM. So it was actually just those 3 teams for a long time. And then we layered in the CSMs. And again, my whole thing is you don't create a new team or a new process unless you know what problem you're solving. We layered in the CSMs because the AEs were spending a lot of time on post-sales activities, and they're still doing renewals. I still feel very strongly that all commercial conversations need to live within a sales org, but that they were spending a ton of time on adoption activities, and it was taking time away from going out and outbounding and finding expansion and doing revenue generating activities. And as a company at our stage, like, you have to be in market share mode. You have to be super focused on acquiring new customers and growing your customer base, because that's where back to the NDR conversation, that's where all your future revenue comes from. And so that's when we decided to layer in the CSMs. So we just did that a few months ago, and so far it's working, but it's definitely everything you said. Like, there have been a lot of, okay, we have much larger account teams now. How does this work? 8 years of roles and responsibility spreadsheets, a lot of meetings defining that, a lot of shared Slack channels on that. But it was because, and so they're focused on adoption. So acquire is the AE and the SC, activate is the DE, adopt is the CSM, and then grow is the AE. And so with a great and successful customer account, you're going through that cycle again and again, because you're launching more and more use cases and more teams. And you just, like, we reached a certain stage where we couldn't have the AE do it all, because we would miss revenue targets, frankly, if we kept doing that.
So much to dive in there. But one thing I want to dive into is, you've said POCs a couple times. And based on our separate conversation, you talked about the importance of POCs. and why you actually like driving folks to it. Can you touch more on that?
Yeah, I mean, part of me thinks that the whole self-service is that it's just a self-service way to get started with the product. And I think for many companies, if you design everything also comes down to how you design pricing and packaging. But if you design your pricing and packaging well, then as a customer's usage of your product and their own maturity expands, they'll be ready for an enterprise option. But some companies will be able to use your self-service product forever. It's going to meet their needs entirely from a technical perspective, from a functionality perspective. But then some, as they mature, they need to use more and more of the product. So I actually think of self-serve as a POC. It's why I love self-service companies. They just, especially for developers, come in, try the product, get started, find success, understand what works for them, be ready to use more. But for enterprise companies with a product as a platform and a product as complex as Retool, like you want to also be sure, again, this comes back to NDR for me. You want to feel really confident they're not buying shelfware and they're going to be successful with the product, and that you're selling them something that you know will add value. You understand how it will add value. You could articulate how it will add value, and you have a pretty good handle on how it will add future value. POCs are a great way to get folks to have skin in the game and to get access to power and access to resources. They're time consuming and they're heavy on sales engineering resources. So it's a trade-off, but I think a really well-run POC can really separate a sales team. And so I like it because it helps you really understand how they're using the product. It gives you a lot of confidence they're going to be successful. And with a product like Retool, you can build a lot of leverage in the POC because you can actually build production-ready applications. And I always joke at the end of a POC, I want people to want to put something into their cart and press buy. And you can actually do that in 2 weeks with Retool, which is nice. So it's also the leverage you can create as well.
And quick question on that from the community: are they paid POCs?
We do both.
Both. Okay. All right. We're going to rapid fire go through questions because we have a ton. I'm going to ask, Leah, do you comp the AE on the initial self-serve purchase? Are the customers assigned round robin?
We do not at Retool. We did at Segment by the time I left. And one of our sales leaders is from Elastic, where that was the model there too. So it's definitely a model. It's not one we do yet. And then other customers assigned round robin. This is an evolving process. But yeah, we have a account pool model that has had varying levels of success, but it's worked to get us till where we are right now, where the AEs, we do round robins for unassigned customers, and then AEs can actually go in and claim and hold on to a set of customers so that they can own them and nurture them and put them back into the pool. If they can outbound prospects, they can outbound self-service customers, and they've all got various ways, putting some folks on this call of finding the really good ones. But yes, that's how the model works today.
Amazing. The next question is from Ashu on how do you facilitate expansion by discovering new use cases across the org?
It is an excellent question, and certainly everyone's going right to the heart of the hard stuff. One of the things that I want us to get really, really good at, the hackathons have actually been great for that. We had folks on site at Netflix the other day running a hackathon, which is how we generated a ton of new use cases there. We've done training sessions. So we'll do webinars where we'll have internal tech talks, where at Coinbase, we did a tech talk to the engineering org where we had 2 Retool champions present what they'd built. And then we offered up office hours and sent out a customized link for folks to come afterward. They're already our customer. And I always say no one should ever apologize for talking to their customer. So the AEs will also they'll pair with a BDR, or they'll do it on their own, do outbound. With Amazon, for example, there's certain things every team in AWS needs to do. So if we built one with one team, we'll go to another team and say, hey, we built this thing over here. We already have basically built it. I mean, this is obviously very reductionist, but should we copy and paste it for you? Because you'll need this new thing as well. And so it's a lot of, and that's again why we like keeping the AEs involved, because they know the company, they know how they buy, they know their procurement processes, they know how they make decisions, they know what they care about, they know their tech stack. All these things that you need to be really, really good at expansion. And then what we'll typically try and do is reach this tipping point. There was this great article someone wrote from Andreessen maybe 2 years ago on finding that sort of penetration point with a product-led growth company, where with Dropbox, it was something like 12% of the company. When 12% of the company is using Dropbox, they know it's time to go to a centralized buyer and say, you might want to look into a site-wide license. We haven't figured out our tipping point, our penetration point yet, but we've started to get there and understanding, okay, when we've got X number of use cases with X number of teams, we're ready to go to someone more centralized and say, do you want us to be your your app building platform, like more of a platform versus for these 4 or 5 use cases.
There's so much tactical knowledge that you are dropping right now. This is fantastic. I feel like I'm rapid firing because we only have a little over 10 more minutes and the questions are blowing up. So thank you. And we're going to keep going. So just get ready for it. All right. Danny said, what other communication channels other than email do your sales folks use to get in touch with self-serve users?
We'll use intercom quite heavily so that some of the savvier folks will see when they're online and send them messages. It's very impressive. We see when folks sign up for trials. So we do HubSpot notifications to the AEs when a self-service customer in their name signs up for a trial. We do a notification when a self-service customer in their name looks at our pricing page. We do notifications when a self-service customer looks at any of our docs for our enterprise features, because we know that there might be a little more intent for that outreach. So it's email. We'll do shared Slack channels during POCs. We don't usually do a shared Slack channel for a self-service customer. That's not of us. So, but we will once we get into POCs, but it's typically email and intercom. And the key is using platforms to find them at the moments of high intent and to make sure a big thing we focus on is our outreach has to be value oriented. It can't be, how can I help? Or do you like Retool? Or like, can I get you some enterprise features? But like, hey, like we've noticed this is what you're building and this new feature or functionality. Hey, did you see these release notes? This new thing might be really valuable. Hey, we noticed you're hiring for an internal tools team. We have a lot of expertise about how to stand up this first type of internal tools team. Or, hey, we're doing a lightning webinar where these 3 customers are talking about their use cases, and X company is a company like you, like Snowflake just did one. And so we reached out to every customer, self-service customer that used Snowflake and said, hey, want to hear how Snowflake uses Retool on top of Snowflake? Like, come to this lightning demo from an engineer at Snowflake. So primarily email and intercom, and then just trying to focus the outreach on how can we add value and understand their use case and understand their company before we go right into, but also you can get a discount for converting to annual.
Amazing. I think we answered Nab's question.
Yep. So you'll have an AE and a CSM on the account is the key.
Yep. And then Danny, who's on the hook for activation success?
It's the deployed engineering team. So and just from a comp perspective for that one, the success team is compensated on NDR. So on that net dollar retention number, and which is what we actually did at Segment too. And then for activation success, it's the deployed engineering team.
And so are they, in terms of activation, I'm assuming you're also not just looking at NDR, but actually like usage metric.
Yeah. So that's more usage metrics. Is their first use case in production, and does it have at least 5 end users? Well, actually building the app, but you have to refer to the value chain is super interesting because it's the people who are building the app, they're saving engineering time. But I, for example, am logged into Retool every day when I'm not on vacation because we use it for forecasting. We use it for account health. And so I'm logging in for forecasting and account health every day. And so I'm getting a lot of value out of it, even though I'm not building. And so we want to make sure both sides of that value equation are there. And so that's why activation represents, yes, you've built your first use case, but also people are using it. So you're getting the value out of the application, not just the value of building it quickly.
Really interesting. Switching gears a little to Caitlin's question, when is the right stage to add outbound on top of it inbound assist motion?
Before you need it is definitely the right answer there, because it does take a long time. It always takes longer to build than you think. And it's really painful, but it's incredibly important. And the inbound will go away at some point for every company. Maybe not Stripe, but like most companies. And so when I started, we had an outbound DR, and we really invested in the outbound team starting this most recent, sort of the beginning of this most recent year. And last year, 60% of our revenue was inbound. And that's when we started layering it in, because it does, I think, take 6 or 12 months to really get an outbound machine going. It's it's the hiring, it's the people, it's identifying the ICP, it's the messaging, it's all of the systems. It's the compensation, it's the outbound sales motion. It's very different. It's the sales cycles are a lot longer. Your buyers are usually higher up. You're not having someone come to you with a high intent thing. You have to create urgency in a compelling event, and learning how to do that in a repeatable way is really hard. And then you have to also layer in AE, and that also takes time, and figuring out stories and how do you set people up for success and incentives and all those things. So really build an outbound machine, I think, can definitely take at least a year. And so it's really important to do it while the inbound is still going, so that you can still have repeatable revenue growth. You can still make sure that your AEs are super successful and all of those things are happening and you're layering it on alongside. So I guess the short answer is before you need it, like a year before you need it, if you can.
I love that because I feel like people think PLG and they think Slack and Atlassian and Dropbox, which claim for a while not to have any outbound. And it was just totally a self-serve product, which that might work for like the 1% of companies that truly have that viral product. But PLG doesn't need to be Slack. It could be a Retool, which also requires some outbound motion. And that's where product-led sales comes in. Like it's figure out who's using your product and then also build everything else around that.
Right.
To Sandy's question.
Not sales team, but you still,
go ahead.
I was going to say, or you look at a company, Twilio didn't have its first AE until they were at 100 million in revenue. That's not every product-led growth company. And it's funny, I used to joke around with my old CEO and I was like, what was the moment you realized this wasn't Twilio or Stripe? And he was like, oh, I vividly remember it. It was such a delation because I knew I had to invest in outbound and I had to invest in all these other things. And then he was like, and it was great. It taught me the value of sales and it taught me, it was like amazing. He was like, I just wish I had it sooner.
Yeah, I saw a lot of nodding heads there. And quick follow-up on that, the outbound motion, is it totally cold or are you looking into product qualified leads?
Oh, it's both. Or for the BDR team, they're focused on net new to Retool. And for AEs, it's both. So, but typically we want, if you're going to like pay and set up a whole team, like you want them to, like the market education piece is just as important for a company like ours because it's a new category. And my friend's dad taught me this saying that I love, which is it's a lot easier to sell a Ferrari when someone knows what a car is. And so a lot of our outbound is the market education and getting Retool's name in front of companies. So then when there's a problem that Retool can solve, they'll think about Retool and then they'll come inbound. So frequently our outbound efforts drive future inbound and it's just as important, but the AEs will focus more on outbounding to product qualified leads where there's a little more intent and a little more of a warmth there, like hot TAM versus cold TAM, if you will.
Right.
And
like, hey, saw you did XYZ.
Right. That's more it's both, but that's more the AEs and then the BDRs will typically focus. So it's both, but the BDRs will typically focus more on net.
I love that one thing you said around part of the BDR SDR's role isn't just about like getting meetings booked. It's also educating the educating what is a car so that then when you get to the conversation, you can talk about the Ferrari. It's not just all about pipeline. I mean, it is a lot about that.
I mean, it is, but it's like that's what the other reason why standing up a real outbound motion takes time because so much of it, and I joke around about hot TAM versus cold TAM, but if you think about it, like the TAM for Retool is any company with more than 2 people or organization could use an internal tool, but the TAM that knows about Retool and that would think to look for a Retool or an internal tooling platform, let alone Retool, is such a small, tiny, like sand on the beach percentage of that. And so that's also a big part of what the outbound, why the outbound is so important.
Yeah, totally. Randy asked a really good question. This is also switching gears on how do you balance allowing self-serve versus when to intervene? So probably, you can potentially cannibalize a self-serve motion by intervening, but on the other hand, you might need someone to get involved to fully activate them. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Miranda. And certainly, again, also at the heart of a ton of internal meetings about self-serve and activation rates, and especially with an on-prem product where you need to get DevOps involved. And it's typically the person who's deploying Retool is different than the person that's building in Retool, which is different than the person that's consuming the Retool app. And that's why I fundamentally think platform and sort of developer tooling PLG is really, really different. Right now, we don't. It's certainly, I think we're going to get there and we'll be a little more advanced on this soon. But right now, the AEs focus more on the folks who are a little more further along in the self-serve journey. We have a team. We actually don't have a team right now totally dedicated to self-serve. And this exact problem is why we're thinking about, do we build a team that's focused on self-serve activation, like a product team or a marketing team or ops team, like also where that lives looks different at every company. But right now we just know that we track our activation rates and we know this is a reason why they're not as high for self-serve because there aren't humans involved. Our support team is usually pretty involved with this too, but it's reactive, not proactive. So yeah, it's actually something we've talked about a lot. And I think something that we could invest in more because it's a really great point.
Yeah, folks have the same problems. my current company and the last company, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So hopefully
I mean,
follow your journey. Once you solve it, I'll ask you.
it was the same thing at Segment, where you need to get Segment launched and you need to connect all your resources and then you need to connect it to all your things. And so, yeah, it's fundamentally why I also think platform PLG is different than point solution PLG in many ways.
Really agree.
That's a great point. Thank you, Randy. And I think a common theme we hear in all these AMAs is it's just different for every company and you need to experiment to figure it out. And it's constantly, you're going to be trying new things, which is part of your point on spinning up an outbound team. Like you need to figure it out. Like who's ICP? What are the pain points? What is this new use case? What is the motion? Like it's the same thing, testing that out.
Yeah. Do we do use case oriented outbound about like, hey, we know marketplaces, like if we look across our marketplace customers, every marketplace has built a tool like this. Should we go after the end users and outbound them and say, hey, do you need this tool? But wait, can you please bring in an engineer? Because actually you can't do it yourself. Or do we go to the engineers and say, hey, are you tired spending time building tools in React for your business stakeholders? And do you want to build internal tools incredibly fast? Like, I don't know. I think I've always joked that I'm like, if someone outbounded me and said, want a way to run pricing experiments without having to impact your ARR, talk to your finance team or your engineering team, I would request a demo. But like, I would also not be the one who would be able to implement that tool. And so I don't know how effective I'd be at buying it, but I would certainly become a qualified lead. And so, yeah, that's the other type of thing that we're experimenting with and why outbound takes a while to really spin up.
I have a very tactical question. As you're learning and experimenting with personas, use cases, inbound team, outbound team, how do you track success all this? Like, do you have a Notion doc running of hypotheses? Do you have weekly stand-ups to test what's happening? Do you have kind of voice of customer meetings? What does that look like?
We do a weekly top of funnel meeting with all the team that contribute. So outbound team, the AEs, the inbound team, the marketing team. That's typically where we're tracking it. Just to get super tactical, it's in a Doodle doc. And we have a lot of Retool dashboards actually where we're tracking a lot of this and taking snapshots and looking at changes week over week. But I think, again, that's also an area where there's still so much and too much of it that sits in tribal knowledge. And when we're just spinning up like really more sophisticated sales enablement. And before it would be like, oh, how do you do self-service? You don't talk to Noah, he'll help you learn how to do that. Or how do you do outbound? Don't talk to Adara, she'll help you spin that up. And so we're working on codifying things a little bit more. And then we have a weekly meeting with all the representatives who contribute to top of funnel to discuss how everything's working and what we learned week over week.
I love it. Amazing. That was absolutely incredible. I am just like, I've learned a ton for Pocus's go-to-market motion. And I've saw so many heads nodding and just things we couldn't even get through. So we'll do our best if we didn't get to your question to see if Eleanor can send some notes afterwards. But other than that, and we give you a huge thank you, Eleanor. This was incredible. You have such a clear expertise on product-led sales and just great ideas, just seeing it all in multiple different companies. And I loved all of your perspective and insight. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me and for all the questions that made me think about all the work I need to do when I do.
Well, enjoy vacation first, and then you can think about product-led sales. Talk to you soon after your vacation.